As we explore these proclamations, these songs of Christmas, we're going to look at a song from Elizabeth and a song from Zechariah in this powerful posture that they take that creates all kinds of opportunity for God to move. When you jump into the first two chapters of Luke's gospel, we find ourselves in the midst of a musical. Everybody's got a song on their lips. In the last episode, Brad tackled Mary's song, the Magnificat, and in this episode, we're going to look at Elizabeth's song and Zechariah's song. But look at this. The angels have a song. Simeon has a song. It's like everybody is singing something about this Messiah that's about to be born. And as Luke sets the stage, what he does is he arranges the pieces in such a way that we find Zechariah, this priest who's in the temple, and as he's serving there, he's chosen by lot to go in and burn incense on the altar of incense in the temple. And as he's doing that, the angel Gabriel appears to him. And Gabriel announces to him, Zechariah, you and your wife Elizabeth are going to have a child. And Zechariah, who is well on in years, is a little taken aback, A, by the presence of an angel that he didn't expect, but B, what do you mean we're gonna have a baby? How can this be? And Gabriel responds to him and says, well, I stand in the presence of God. I'll tell you how it's gonna be. And now because you didn't believe, you are going to be silent until the baby is born. And that's exactly what happens to Zechariah. He is silent until we read in Luke chapter 1, on the day, the 8th day, when the baby was to be named, he took a writing tablet and indicated his name is John. And as soon as he did that, his lips are opened and he bursts into song. And that song is called the Benedictus. And in the previous episode, Brad talked about Mary's song called the Magnificat, and it just comes from that first line of her song, magnified. That word magnified in Latin is Magnificat, and the same is true for Zechariah's song. The first expression of his prayer is praise be or blessed, and in Latin, that gets translated as Benedictus. But really, in a nutshell, what Zechariah does is he anchors his song around this key Hebrew phrase. It shows up at the beginning of the song, and then it shows up at the end of the song. And so I just want to read to you, in verse 68, he says, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. Now, this word has come shows up again in the next to last line of the song in verse 78. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us. So it's translated differently, but it's really this same word. Now, there's the Greek word, it's the New Testament, so this passage is written in Greek. But what Luke is doing is he's drawing on a really, really well-known word that has a long history throughout the Hebrew scriptures, and that word is pakad. It means to visit or to see or visitation. Now, I want to show you just a couple of seminal passages where this word shows up so you can start to get a flavor for the role that it plays in the Hebrew scriptures. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now that word pakad right here, come to your aid. You wouldn't notice it because it doesn't sound like see or visit, but that's the word pakad. Here's another one in Exodus 4:31, when Moses comes to the Israelites and he says to them, the God of your forefathers sent me to you. He wants to bring you out of slavery in Egypt. It says that the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them. It's that word pakad. And then it shows up in 1 Samuel 2:21 when Hannah prays. And Brad just mentioned Hannah briefly in the last episode on Mary's song, because Mary seems to draw quite a bit from Hannah's prayer. And when Hannah is giving thanks to God for this child that she's given birth to, in 1 Samuel 2:21, it says, the Lord was gracious. It's this word, pakad. It essentially means that God sees, God cares, and God shows up. And that's all kind of built into this word to visit or visitation. Now, as I was thinking about this word, I started to remember my childhood with my dad. When I was 13 years old, my dad became the pastor of our church, and he's still the pastor of our church 30 years later. But on Tuesday and Thursday nights, after dinner, he would go do what he called visitation. And he would go into people's homes in the church, people who were sick, people who were struggling, people that he just hadn't seen in a while, to pray with them and just to say, hey, I see you, I care about you, you matter to me. And if my dad were here today, one of the things that he would say to you is that when you boil it right down to like kind of the essence of things, the kingdom is really ultimately about showing up in people's lives in this way. And that's the essence of Zechariah's song, that God sees us, God cares for us, and God has shown up. It's a powerful, powerful song. And powerful songs often emerge from really powerful stories. This is a man named Horatio Spafford. Some of you will be familiar with that name. He's one of the great hymn writers of the Christian tradition. And he wrote a well-known hymn that I'm going to tell you about here in just a second. But the backstory that created the context out of which that hymn came to us is unbelievably moving. So Horatio Spafford lived in Chicago. And in 1871, with the Great Chicago Fire, he and his family lost almost everything that they owned. And they're just reeling from that loss. And so in 1873, he said, I got to get my family out of here. And they planned a European vacation. But because of some last minute business, Horatio Spafford wasn't able to join his family. So he sent them across the Atlantic with the intention of following them a few days later. Well, on their voyage across the Atlantic, their ship was struck by another ship and it sunk. And 4 of his daughters were killed. His wife was the only survivor. And Spafford received the news, jumped on the next ship, and as he was halfway across the Atlantic, the captain of the boat, who knew about the tragedy, brought him up on deck and said, this is the general place where your daughters perished. And it was there that Horatio Spafford received the inspiration to write the words, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And it's a powerful song, but it comes from this powerful story. And that ought to get us curious to say, wow, this powerful song that Zechariah sings, what is the story that inspires that song? And so when you look into Luke chapter 1, we read a couple of things about Zechariah and Elizabeth. First, we read, in the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. So Zechariah is a priest. He's serving in the temple in Jerusalem at a time when priests and the temple in Jerusalem were often seen as corrupt, as oppressive, as people who were in cahoots with the Romans. And yet, as Paul Wright tells us, most other priests live outside Jerusalem, and many did not participate in the Jerusalem priesthood's wealth or influence. Evidence suggests that the majority were diligent and dedicated to their service. So we learned in Luke chapter 1, verse 5, that he is from the priestly order of Abijah. And when you look into the Hebrew scriptures, you're going to see that the priestly orders were broken down into 24 divisions. And each division would serve in the temple 2 weeks out of the year. And they would be there for a full week, and then they also needed to be available to come to the temple during the 3 great pilgrimage festivals. And they would carry out their priestly duties in the temple. And so Zechariah, for all intents and purposes, he's not a part of the corrupt system of the temple. He lives somewhere outside of Jerusalem. He's got another job. He shows up a couple of times a year. And so he's a picture of humility. He's a picture of diligence. But then we learn in verse 7 that he and Elizabeth are barren. They're unable to have children. Now, I don't know if you've ever walked or journeyed with anybody who's gone through infertility, but it is just absolutely devastating. I mean, it's a disappointment that arrives month after month after month. My wife and I have known people who, in their excitement about their baby, went ahead and finished the baby room and then experienced just month after month of painful infertility as that crib stayed empty. And that's the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth. They have this pain, but it's accentuated by something that we learn from Elizabeth in Luke chapter 1, verse 25. When she finds out that she's pregnant, she says, "The Lord has done this for me. In these days, he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." And you go, like, what disgrace? There's no disgrace in being infertile until you realize that in that culture, it was considered God's judgment on sin for a woman to be barren, for her and her husband to be unable to conceive. So in addition to the disappointment about being able to have a child, they're suffering this humiliation, this judgment, the whispers of the people around them. And you just think that had to have felt so awful, so humiliating. But one of the great things about Elizabeth's story is that she actually stands in a long line of barren women who become really key players in the story of redemption. So when you look through the Hebrew scriptures, you'll see Sarai, Rebecca, Rachel, Manoah's wife, who's the mother of Samson, Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel, and the Shunammite's wife. Now, this is the only baby that we don't know what becomes of the baby, but all of these other babies go on to play a significant role in the story of redemption. And the same is going to be true for Elizabeth. So Zechariah is this humble priest. Elizabeth and Zechariah, they're barren and they suffer the community's judgment. And then we learn this about them in Luke chapter 1, verse 6. Both of them were upright in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commandments and regulations blamelessly. And I love this because even though they're disappointed, that disappointment doesn't harden into cynicism or despair. And you see that quality show up in the songs that they sing. So I want to read through Zechariah's song from start to finish and then Elizabeth's song and just point out how you start to see this humility, this tenderness start to shine through. So let's read Zechariah's Benedictus. He says, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. He's raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all of our days." And then Zechariah shifts gears a little bit here and he sings about his child. "And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. Because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness, in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." That's a beautiful, beautiful song. And just like Brad pointed out with Mary's song last week, Zechariah also knows his Bible because the song is just littered with references to the Messiah. Early on, he talks about the descendant of David. This line here, "by which the rising sun will come to us," that's a direct quote from Malachi chapter 4. To shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death. That has echoes of Isaiah 40, echoes of Isaiah 9. And you just see over and over again, it's like a guy who couldn't have a child of his own, and now his lips are open and he bursts into song, and he's not singing about his baby, he's singing about another baby. The same shows through in Elizabeth's song, when in Luke chapter 1, verse 41 and 42, Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, and the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and in a loud voice she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." It's like it's not about the baby we've been waiting for, it's about the baby we've all been waiting for. There's just such humility in those words. They're not about their own ambition, their own agenda. They are dialed in to what God is doing in redemptive history. And that humility, it rubs off on their son, because their son John is going to become this powerful orator who's going to amass this huge following. And when he comes on the scene, he is going to baptize Jesus. And when he sees Jesus, he says to everybody, look, this is the one I talked about. This is the one whose sandals I am not even worthy to untie. So he baptizes Jesus, and Jesus launches his ministry under the umbrella of John's message of the forgiveness of sins. And then Jesus starts baptizing. And some of John's disciples come to him, and they've got a problem with this. And they come to him in John 3:26, and they said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, well, he's baptizing, and everyone's going to him. They're a little put off by this. And notice John's response 4 verses later. He says, he must become greater, I must become less. When you look at Zechariah's song and Elizabeth's song, it's not about them. It's not about their baby. It's about God's baby. It's about the baby and what God is doing. And that humility shows through in their son. It's just a family whose lives announce, it's not about us. It's not about us. It's not about us. This is about what God is up to. Even their names, and in the Bible, somebody's name is indicative of their calling or their purpose. And when you look at their names, Zechariah means God remembers. Elizabeth means God's oath. John means God's grace. I mean, this family announces with their lives, God remembers his people, God keeps his promises, and God gives grace. And the humility that comes from this family prepares the way for the God who sees and cares to show up and come among us. And I absolutely am captivated by that thought. I think if you just step back and you said it more simply, you could just say, humility creates possibility. I mean, think about what happens in a marriage where between a husband and a wife, there is the courage to hear hard things, the willingness to apologize and to say things like, I'm sorry, I was way out of line, I was angry, I was harsh, I shouldn't have said that. I mean, what is possible in that marriage that's not possible in the kind of marriage where somebody always has to be right, where somebody always has to have the last word? I mean, think about business. What's possible in a company where people are encouraged, where fellow staff members are lifted up? When somebody fails, we don't kick them to the curb. We encourage them to get back up and try again, where everybody can come to the table and the best idea is going to be the idea that we use. What is possible in that kind of company that's not possible in the company where it always has to be the boss's idea, where if you make a mistake, we're done with you? I mean, that kind of company is going to have a culture, is going to create things that are just so much more rich and beautiful. Why? It's because humility creates possibility. And I just think as we, during this Christmas season, remember and celebrate that God is a God who sees us, who cares for us, and who in Jesus came among us, and we anticipate that God's going to come again, what would it look like for us to practice humility and create the kind of possibilities in our lives for the God who sees, the God who cares, to show up among us again? Well, friends, that's it in a nutshell. Zechariah's song, the Benedictus, humility creates possibility. And my hope for you this Christmas season, whatever it looks like for you to live this out, to walk this out, all of these opportunities for you to take a posture of humility, may we be the kind of people who walk out this text well in our lives.